Good morning. Venerable Mahasangha, distinguished guests, respected members of the faculty, students, and all of you have been here for RASAS 2025. It is indeed a great honor to stand before you as the co-secretary of the 10th Ruhuna Arts Students Annual Sessions. Today it's my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Nimalka Fernando. At the outset, I wish to express our sincere appreciation to her for graciously accepting our invitation and joining us today despite her many professional commitments. Dr. Nimalka Fernando, attorney at law, is a distinguished feminist and human rights defender with over 4 decades of professional experience and unwavering commitment to promoting justice, equality, and human dignity. Throughout her remarkable career, Dr. Fernando has served in a wide range of leadership positions at national, regional, and international levels. She was the regional coordinator of the Asia-Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development from 1989 to 1994 and the co-chairperson of South Asians for Human Rights. Dr. Fernando is also a pioneer member of several regional and global initiatives, including the Asian Democracy Network, People's SAC, and Mothers and Daughters of Lanka. Her contributions in these spaces reflect her tireless efforts to advance democratic values and gender justice across Asia. From 2018 to 2021, she served as a commissioner of the Office of Missing Persons, where she played a vital role in addressing human rights concerns and strengthening mechanisms of transitional justice in Sri Lanka. At present, Dr. Fernando serves as a director of Women's Political Academy in Sri Lanka and the International Movement Against All Forms of Discrimination and Racism, an international NGO with United Nations Economic and Social Council consultative status. In addition to her institutional roles, Dr. Fernando is widely recognized as an expert trainer and consultant in the field of gender and human rights, contributing significantly to capacity building and policy advocacy in these domains. So, we are honored to have with us today distinguished individual whose life's work stand as a testament of courage, compassion, and justice. So, we are confident that her insights and reflections will inspire us to think critically and act meaningfully in our respective fields. So it's my great pleasure to invite Dr. Nimalka Fernando to deliver the keynote address of RASAS 2025. Thank you.
Venerable Mahis, Dean of the University, Dean of the Faculty, and the Organizing Committee of RASAS 25, academic and non-academic staff, distinguished guests, students. It is a very energizing day today to me after long years to enter this faculty that gives you energy as you enter. Its location, its architecture, and the manner in which this activity has been organized made me very proud of the fact that I am a Sri Lankan, born in Sri Lanka, educated in Sri Lanka, and struggling in Sri Lanka to keep our standards, to keep our stature, and to uphold the civilization to which we are all accountable. And when I look at this theme, I think it is a very appropriate theme, not that I think, and I am very happy to see that you have selected a theme that is also linked to our civilization. What is our civilization if not for the environment that we have to preserve. The archaeology, the seas around us, the rivers around us, the mountains that we have now made it like our holiday resorts, but not at times looking after the beautiful environments when we take holidays. So therefore, the topic is very significant and very challenging also. At a time when we take environment taken for granted, and we sometimes think that environment is for sale. Tourism is not selling our environment. Tourism is all about preserving our environment and sharing that with the outside world. So therefore, thank you very much. As a Sri Lankan, I have to thank this university and the organizers of RASAS 2025, including the students. I was listening very carefully to the topics you have chosen, and I think I am learning more than me having to give you by way of a lecture. So I am here as a student as well as somebody who want to share with you my thoughts with regard to the policy formulation and the manner in which it moves in. I wish to actually express a special thank you to India Kurugoda, whom I consider an exceptional academic and a democratic activist. Actually, I met her accidentally. Ar Sinhala kiyane ahamben thamai mata Indiva hamba une. But I have valued her inputs and I have listened to her in-depth analysis on many subjects, and I have also become a student of hers. Because I am now more an activist. I hardly step into a university. We sometimes behave as if we know everything, but then sometimes when she is giving a lecture, I am the first to take down notes. So thank you very much indeed. And I agreed to come in because I know that we need to, she is doing something well, and the university is promoting this energizing students to think aloud. At the same time, thank you very much for allowing me the freedom to select the topic. The moment she told me that it is related to policy, I grabbed and said, let me discuss about gender. But gender can be a very sensitive topic, a very challenging topic, but we need to address that issue squarely and firmly. So this issue of policy development, issue of gender and also environment has been in my life in the many movements I have been involved in. I have been involved in student movements, youth groups, I have been involved with academics and political parties, those in power, especially asking the questions, what is gender in Sri Lanka? What is the position of, when you say men and women in Sri Lanka? So when we raise the issue of gender, it is not purely about women, it is about the social integration of both human beings, all human beings in Sri Lanka, in sharing its resources, its governance, and its environment. So it's not a matter of a struggle or a fight between two members of the species, but it is the search for the creation of a journey to make this life or this society and the country is more livable for everybody. Why do I say that? We will look into that. What is policy? So when I'm actually thinking aloud with you, because you come from the academic sector, you are our students, I'm looking at a more doable process, because you can have a policy, but that could be like a toothless tiger. ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ ප්‍රතිපත්තිය හරියට දත් නැති කොටියක් වුණොත්, දත් නැති සිංහයෙක් වුණොත් එහි palak nathi වෙනවා. It cannot be a toothless tiger. So when we hear the word policy, sometimes we smile. Sometimes we smile very sarcastically because there are enough policies in Sri Lanka. I mean, sometimes I would also say when we are thinking of policies, 1,000 years ago we have made policies, 30 years ago we have made policies. Some of these policies are almost like 500 pages if you go to the parliament, and if you want to find out the constitutional making and the constitutional policy making in Sri Lanka, you will find almost like 3,000 to 4,000 pages, but still we are saying we need policies. So therefore, in that respect, policy is not a static thing. It relates to the history, it relates to the past, it gets revived in the present, and it looks towards the future. So that is the process that I am talking about. So when I think of government policies, most of the time we think of government documents, committees, committee meetings, lengthy reports, and they sometimes look very distant from us, from our daily lives. But policy is everywhere. In the bus you take to the university, the hospital when you enter, it is part and parcel and linked to the healthcare system, our health policy, and what we receive, the content in our school curriculum and the content in the university curriculum. And even in the laws that determine who can own land, who gets qualified for maternity leave, or who is disowned by land, policy is involved. Policies and laws go together. Policy is the thought, the intent of us to make something new or to abolish something. But in order to do that, we have to create at times regulations and laws and bylaws. But policy is very important because it is so linked to ideas. It is so linked to the thought processes of human beings with regard to social, economic, political and developmental upliftment of a given society, any society. So policies are the backbone of how society decides its progress or regression. We can come into some policies, and sometimes we also ask the question, are we taking the country back, or are we taking the humanity back to 50 years? Especially that arises in relation to women's rights. Some countries don't want to recognize the equality of women, and they would bring all kinds of customary policies, all kinds of religious policies, and would say you have to remain where you are. There, we as feminists, we critique such policy because that creates a regressive process to women's lives. Whether we go forward or whether we are going back to dark ages, including whose voices are heard or not, it is important to understand that policies are linked to priorities. There must be priorities, there are priorities. Policies are informed by the needs of the people, human beings, and also now environmental animals. I'm quickly adding that in the. If this university decides to make this institution a no ragging zone, do you need a law for that, or do you need a policy for that? Your idea of making this university a no ragging zone does not need laws. It needs the idea and a policy that everybody is committed to that. So we are going in a double-edged sword. Sometimes people say to stop ragging you need laws. I'm a lawyer by profession. Therefore I would say very honestly, everything in life cannot be dictated by laws. But policies and our thought, that's why it is very important, the issue of policy, ප්‍රතිපත්තිය. ඉද්ද ගැහුවා වගේ ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් ඕනේ කියලා අපි කියනවා සමහර වෙලාවට සිංහලෙන්. මට ඒක එච්චර ඉංග්‍රීසියෙන් කියන්න දන්නේ නැහැ. එතකොට if we take a firm policy that there will be no ragging in this university, it binds us. Every individual, every student, academic, non-academic staff, that's my individual decision, my idea, there won't be any ragging. So policy is also a very powerful tool in reforming institutions, changing our lifestyles, changing our environment. Most of the time people say, we need a policy, we need a law to stop things, right? But you should know the power of a policy. Policy is what we will believe together. But the important thing is there must be a process in the development of that policy. I cannot come and force a policy of no ragging on you, which is done by law, which also leaves room for violation. But if we all come together to a collective understanding that this is a policy that we are collectively committed, then we are in a very high level as human beings committed to progress and to end violence of that sort. If Sri Lanka wants to eradicate poverty by the year 2050, a policy has to be drawn. There's no point in saying that we have to end poverty, that we are ending poverty. We have to see a policy. We have to see a guideline. We have to see an action plan that follows the implementation of the policy. Similarly, if we want a society that values equality between men and women, girls and boys, and recognize the rights of all genders, then gender-sensitive policies are essential. Now, technically, policy making refers to the systematic steps taken by governments or the authoritative bodies to address a public issue. Public means what matters to all citizens and environment. It is essentially about deciding what to do, what should be done, what we should do and how it should be done. Now, because it is a more educated community, I'm sure you have heard about public policy, your universities' public policy. But there are policies in relation to organizations. Public policy is framed by government bodies to address national and community level issues. There can be organizational policies. There can be Sangha Sabhava, there can be family association in Matara. There will be rules and guidelines adopted by institutions such as universities, business or NGOs. In the context of Sri Lanka, I'm just reminding what are some of the important policies that has also framed our lives. The free education policy in 1945, the health policy on free universal health care, which we are all enjoying. And the most recent, and that is why I wanted to discuss it more or discuss the national policy on reconciliation and coexistence in 2017, which is the country's commitment towards reconciliation, and the very recent in 2023 gender equality and equity policy adopted by the cabinet in 2023. And a law was enacted to implement that policy to establish the National Women's Commission. If I ask you to raise hands about how many of you have heard about DEP and the establishment in the NWC, I would say only about 10%. It is the least heard about and discussed about policy, but I am not going to deal in details with regard to the gender equity and equality policy. If I have the time, I will mention, but it encompasses the areas that Sri Lanka has to develop with regard to the constitutional guarantee that has been given to the women in Sri Lanka with regards to equality. The law can say you are equal, but your lived experience can be different. So then you need policies to guide the gap, to bring, to diffuse that disconnect between the law and the life that you are living. And then if you find that there are still more gaps, based on that policy, gender equality policy, you can develop mechanisms, tools, laws to bridge the gap between the de jure provision for equality and the de facto difference that we are living. The women here in students can discuss that with Indi and I can help you. Policy making is not just the idea, like I said, not everybody can have certain policies, that is why sometimes in ICCPR we are very careful about the fact that though we have freedom of expression, the freedom of expression cannot be based on hate speech. So when you are making a policy, policy has to bear in mind many things. There must be an agenda setting. We have to, so because there are more students and you are involved in the policy formulation, I'm just rushing through this. You need an agenda. You identify priorities. I mentioned somewhere that it is linked to priority. Now, I gave the example of ragging. If ragging is the priority in this institution, that you have to begin agenda setting. That's a priority. If rising youth unemployment in Sri Lanka is the most crucial thing for us to handle, we have to consider agenda setting. You need to understand and you have to set the agenda. Then it becomes a collective. It's identified. Experts, politicians, civil servants, university students, interest groups, you have to debate about that identified problem. So there's a policy formulation. When we brought in Aswasuma or Samurdhi, I remember, especially with regard to Samurdhi, I was a young activist at that time. We participated very much. We went to villages. We understood the poverty levels. We understood what was necessary. So the policy became a poverty alleviation program. So the idea of Samurdhi was, the policy formulation was to reduce poverty. Then there has to be decision making. You form the policy, then you have the decision making. So it establishes institutions. So you can bring an environmental policy, but you have to also ask the question, what is happening to the existing institutions? Can we revive the existing institutions? So you need the decision making angle. Then you need to implement. Then at the same time, you have to evaluate. This is where it is very important, because policy is not something that, as I said, it links history, it links the present, and it links the past. So there is what we call in certain educational language a praxis, action, reflection, action. Policy leads to action, you reflect, you evaluate, and again you act, and new policies happen. So it's also not static. You evaluate that policy based on the contemporary challenges. Why is this important? I am now summarizing, because it addresses public needs, it ensures participation and legitimacy. Participation and legitimacy, I feel, is what is most lacking in policy making in Sri Lanka. Somebody thinks that it is important. Political parties think it is important. But then we always question the fact, is there participation from the people who are affected? When we were forming the Office on Missing Persons, we were very, very clear that victims of 1989, 1971, 1980s, that they should be consulted. Actually, the Mother Office was my domain. I was in charge of Mother Office. So every Friday I was here discussing with the families here who have experienced disappearances, what is best for you. The law is there, but then in the implementation of the law and the policy, you have to ask them, what are your needs? So there has to be a great participation. Then only people have confidence. Then only people have the legitimacy. So if you just say ragging must be banned, you have to have a discussion. There must be a participation so that the legitimacy is there with regard to your policy. Then you can have a policy, now gender policy. But if there is no money, something internationally we learned is all the countries said by 2030 we will bring women's participation by 30%. After 5 years at the UN, when we were listening, all the governments came and told us they have no money to allocate especially for gender, because Sri Lanka, of course, said we were running a war, we have no money. African countries said poverty is much severe. Some other countries had some other priorities. They said there is no money. That led to a new policy called gender budgeting. Okay, you promise to make it gender equal in governance, but if you say you have no money, then in your budget you allocate money that is specially given to women, not as a special consideration, but right through all the ministries see how it will help in achieving gender equality. So the gender budgeting policy is a must in, budget is a policy document. You must all understand that. So in that, one aspect of that should be gender policy, where every ministry, you can't say because there are 50% of or 60%, when I was in law college, 60% of women were in law college. So then I'm happy. But at the same time, when I became a lawyer, and now if you look at the judiciary, it's dominated by men. But there's no environment for women to work there. Same so you can look at that. Then it also promotes stability and predictability. That is why it is very important to have a policy, because you know what is going to happen in the future and how we can even reform the trajectory. And it also encourages accountability. Now this is where sometimes you have a policy now, like Universal Declaration of Human Rights or CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. There are policies, but then governments can easily ignore. So with the policy you need an accountability process whereby you rigorously evaluate. So the countries go before various experts committees with their reports in relation to their performances. Then there are certain tables, tabulations, benchmarks. Then we review and say whether this policy has been practically implemented, or if you are unable to practically implement, what actions to be taken. So investigation at the UN level with regard to gender policy discussion is not something that is done against the government, or human rights is not something against the government, because that policy that we have in CEDAW is reviewed to see where are the challenges we have, all countries go through. So in policy, what is important is that also creates accountability. In democratic societies, good policy making is inclusive, evidence-based and accountable. It must be informed by the realities of people's lives, particularly those of marginalized groups. Sometimes all discussions take place only in the cities. We also say, ice kamarwalane, AC kamarwala policy hadane. But it must be informed. It must link to the village. It must link to the marginalized people. When it comes to gender, the importance of policy becomes even more evident. Gender is not only about biological differences, it is about how society structures opportunities, power, and expectations around those differences. If our policies ignore gender, they risk reinforcing discrimination, even unintentionally. Take, for example, employment policy. A neutral-looking labor policy that fails to address unpaid care work of women will disadvantage women who carry the bulk of household responsibilities. Similarly, education policies, they are gender neutral, but it does not consider gender stereotypes in university curricula, can perpetuate inequality from in school curriculum and university curriculums, can perpetuate inequality within the institution and which can go back to the society. That is why gender responsive policy making is so crucial. It looks at how policies affect women, men and people of diverse gender identities and sexual differences, and then corrects those imbalances. Now, early milestone, because I am running out of time. Early milestone in the Constitution of Sri Lanka have the gender policy in Article 12, which enshrines the gender equality for men and women. And in 1993, as far back as 1993, we had a national policy on women. Then we have in 2014 to 2023 a national plan of action that was based on, I mentioned earlier, the CEDAW, the UN Convention on Women, and the recent development is the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment policy that has now formed the National Women's Commission, that will be a very powerful mechanism in order to promote women's rights and violations and whatever women are facing. However, policies are not enough. As we have seen in Sri Lanka experience, many good policies remain only on paper. Implementation often fails because of insufficient funding, lack of coordination among ministries and independence, and inadequate monitoring. So for students to ask questions, when you are making a policy, how can young people and especially university students, you have to educate yourself and ask questions. There's something called policy literacy. That's the first step. Learn how decisions are made. Then you have to use evidence for advocacy. So gender rights advocacy must be backed with data. You can always engage your local governance at the local level when you are formulating policies for environment. It's very important that you link your environmental policy with your local government bodies. Then you have to also champion inclusion and intersectionality. That is, gender rights cannot be isolated from other forms of inequality such as caste, class, ethnicity or disability. True policy reform must reflect these intersections. You have to also hold institutions accountable. Policies must be followed by action. Be part of the change. Policy making is not the exclusive domain of politicians. Each citizen has a role through activism, social media, research, volunteering or community engagement. My own organization, my own action for the last so many decades had been that engaging in local activity and policy making, ensuring that voices from grassroots communities shape the national agenda. Let me conclude with this thought. Policies are not just about paperwork or bureaucracy. They are about power. Who holds it, who exercises it, and for whose benefit. Gender equality will not emerge by accident. It will be built through deliberate policy choices, informed by justice and empathy. So when you are creating a policy, there must be justice and empathy. As students, so empathy with the environment also. As students, you represent, and as academics, and as citizens of Sri Lanka, we represent the future of this beautiful country. A generation that can redefine what leadership and equality mean. Your ideas, your research and your voice matter to us and to our grandchildren and to the future of this country. Do not underestimate your influence. Every reform that advances gender justice and equality for people of Sri Lanka rests with someone who dares to ask, why not? Why not change? Let us work towards the Sri Lanka where policy is not just written document, that the policy is not written just for women, but it is linked to women, the country, the environment, and where equality is not just an aspiration, environmental justice or ecological justice is not just an aspiration, but a lived reality for all of us that preserves this beautiful country that we all love and that we all say Namo, Namo Mata. Thank you.